This is Duke University.
With books like Pictures in Progress and Constructing the Black Masculine, Duke professor Maurice Wallace has had a keen interest in the construction of the black image throughout the 19th and the 20th century. Today, Professor Wallace joins us here on Left of Black to talk about the black image and raising black girls in the era of Barack Obama. My name is Anthony Neal, and this is Left of Black.
Yeah. Eric, you're a real life G for this one. Yeah.
Welcome to Left of Black. I'm your host, Anthony Neal, and we're joined this afternoon in studio by Professor Maurice Wallace. He is Associate Professor of English and African American Studies here at Duke University, the author of Constructing the Black Masculine, Identity and Ideality in African American Men's Literature and Culture, 1775 to 1995, and also the editor of the brand new book, Pictures in Progress, Early Photography and the Making of African American Identity. Both of those are published by Duke University Press. Thank you for finally making it over here to Left of Black.
Thank you,
Maurice,
sir.
how are you doing?
I'm doing well, man. I'm doing very well.
There are elements in your first book, Constructing the Black Masculine, where you clearly are concerned about this idea of portraiture, right? And particularly this kind of staging of black masculinity. Talk a little bit about, this interest of yours in photography, particularly early photography, as it relates to African American identity.
Well, to be honest, it was an accidental interest. Being gripped by an image on the cover of the New York Times Magazine in December of 1994 that was actually the inspiration for the work I began to do on black visual representation and masculinity. It was an image of an unidentified, apparently young African American man shot from behind, and the caption beneath the image read, "The black man is in trouble, whose problem is that?" And it was enormously provocative. And I had begun some work with my dissertation supervisor then, now colleague, Carla Holloway, and we went back and forth about this image. And in the course of identifying the history behind this image, I also became very interested in the cultural logic of photographic representation from the very beginning of the photograph in the 19th century with the development of the daguerreotype in, I think, 1839, and then the carte de visite, these very cheaply made, more portable, simple photographic calling cards, as you were, the carte de visite. And so my interest developed as a result of that original cover, but it took me all the way back to the 19th century in order to kind of comprehend, as I said, the cultural logic of photographs in the first place. So on the one hand, there is the technology, but then there's also the way the technology is narrativized and the way that the public comes to understand what the technology is doing and can doing. So it was very interesting work, and I've just been gripped by it ever since.
Talk a little bit from your own intellectual process, what the challenges or transition were. I mean, you're a man of words, right? Both in terms of traditional scholarly writing, also as a minister. So how has it been to try to articulate, using the visual, right? Or in reading the visual, right? Things that may come naturally more naturally in terms of using words.
Well, it's been fascinating. It's meant that I've spent a lot of time staring at images, and in fact hoping to hear what images have to say. And some of this is a function of being a fairly contemplative person, but I've also been inspired in this direction by the work of my colleague Fred Moulton, who's had us all now start to think about the sounds that photographs of everything, right. But it is it's a far smoother transition than you might imagine. It's not jarring. It is nearly continuous with my own ways of thinking and my own sensitivities to not only what's on the page, but the space I occupy, and sometimes The space I occupy has its own history that I'm trying often to hear. And so it is not altogether a disjuncture. It's not always easy, it's not always smooth, but I'm always looking to historicize, to try to find out the conditions for the production of images and photographs. So I'm both digging into archives a lot and trying to listen very intently to what images might have to say. I was also inspired in this more recently as well by the work of W.J.T. Mitchell in Chicago, whose book, What Do Pictures Want, has really allowed me to imagine photographs as having a near agency of their own. And so I'm always trying to question photographs for what they want, and often what we imagine the subjects of photographs want. I'm these days looking again at the images of those racist scientific images by Louis Agassiz, right, and seeing an image of a denuded African American woman, a female slave, who's staring back in this camera, either resignedly or defiantly. Right. And I'm asking the question, what does Delia want? What are the possibilities for her subjectivity in this image that may defy what we already think we know about her or about Louis Agassiz and the like? So it's something of an intellectual adventure. It requires me to be as nimble as I can be, but I'm loving it. I am.
You're watching Left of Black. I'm your host, Mark Anthony Neal. We're joined by Professor Maurice Wallace, who's a professor of English and African American Studies here at Duke University. He's the co-editor of the new book with Sean Michelle Smith, Pictures in Progress, Early Photography and the Making of African American Identity. When you think about early photography in African Americans, right, and it's, you know, we all have access to something that can capture a picture on our phones, actual cameras, iPads. So the amount of pictures that have been taken, say in the last generation, far outweigh some of the things that might have been done when folks didn't have access to the technology. But there seemed to be much more of a conscious effort, particularly among African Americans, that pictures weren't random. Right. They were staging something, whether it was black respectability, whether it was staging citizenship. In the case of your essay where you talk about, black soldiers, they're staging patriotism, they're staging manhood. Talk a little bit about that staging process as it relates to early African American photography.
Well, there are, of course, two histories of African Americans in photography. There is the history of racist American ethnography and racist caricature. And then there are those African American intellectuals, public figures, sometimes photographers themselves.
Frederick Douglass, for
Frederick
instance,
Douglass being a primary example. Not a professional photographer, but someone whom Sean Michelle Smith and I argue practiced photography nevertheless, was waxed philosophical about the promise of photography, and understood that there was the potential in photography to represent the possibilities of who African Americans could be as respectable subjects in the new nation. And so in some ways, a figure like Douglass was trying to do a kind of visual activism, right? Trying to make claims about black identity and black assimilability into the body politic, but also at work making claims about what freedom looked like. So there are a couple of ways to read the images of these posings, right? In some sense, and from some points of view, they're fairly conservative posings, but from another angle, you can see them as doing a kind of liberatory work, right? Having the nation imagine what black freedom looks like, having circulating those images in and around black communities. So I think that the production of photographs about African American Civil War soldiers, for example, had as much an impact on communities of black folk and about what black manhood looked like, as it did the wider white public that worried what a black man with a gun might do or be in the new nation post-emancipation. So, you know, the wonderful thing about the work that I do is that these two histories, the history of photography, develops and intersects with the history of slavery and emancipation. And so a figure like Douglass and Sojourner Truth, and then later Ida B. Wells, and then some black photographers who are lesser known, start to enter into conversation, not just with one another, but begin to counter visual lies told by or produced by white photographers. And this is a very engaging and important visual debate that's happening across the full expanse of the 19th century. And as I said, these are figures who are as much practitioners as any professional photographer would be. They are very clearly aware of the potential and the possibilities for what photography can do and be for, and sometimes against black people. So it's very intriguing work.
I mean, it's in a way that in the hands of black folks, photography literally becomes kind of a tool of freedom.
Yes, yes,
right?
yes,
You know, if you can visualize it, right, you can actually embrace it and grab hold of it.
It's an appropriation of a new technology. I mean, that's the other thing about it is that I worry sometimes that we imagine that the new technology of our age is not just new, but that we're that this modern audience is and has always been hipper than every other preceding generation. And so we're hip to new technology in ways that our forebears were not hip to new technology. But in fact, photography was a new technology and had as deep an impact on the country as our current technology has on us now, on the way we think. And it's, in fact, it helped change the way we think. And the same can be said for photography in the 19th century. But this is a new technology, and Douglass and Sojourner Truth and Ida B. Wells and so many others were onto it and using it to political ends.
And it speaks to, you know, a century later, I mean, our community's fixation with image making, right, and image controlling and image policing and all those kinds of things, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And it sort of reminds me of perhaps a part of the question you put to me that I didn't fully answer, and that is this business of staging, right? Because on some level, we're talking about performativity. We're talking about the construction of an ideal image. We are talking about the construction, the reproduction, circulation of not simply who we may be, but who we might like to be. And you know, someone like Douglass took it even a step further, got very deep about it, very philosophical about it, and argued ultimately that what distinguished men from animals was this picture-taking capacity, the ability to imagine an objective self apart from us, to look at it, to study it, to analyze, to contemplate it, is part of the nature of being human. And so this staging, this performance is a function not of artifice always, but is a function of what it means to inherit identity as a human, and then to inherit identity or assume an identity as a proper subject of a group, of a society, and the like. So this staging is performative, but it is not performative in the sense of always being somehow artifice. It is the shaping of a kind of identity that it would seem good for us to embody, to reflect, to embrace.
You're watching Left of Black, and we're joined this afternoon by Professor Maurice Wallace, who's a professor of English and African-American Studies here at Duke University. You know, we're at a moment when you talk about this kind of the production of these images, and you think about the Obama White House. And, you know, the Democratic National Convention just occurred. And you know, what's always been interesting about looking at Obama these last 4 years, you know, we all see kind of a front stage Obama. We very rarely see the real backstage, you know, Obama. And when we do see that Obama, even that is staged. So many folks got the chance to see the photograph of President Obama and his daughter, Sasha and Malia, as they're sitting on the couch curled up watching the First Lady, you know, give her address at the convention. And, you know, it's a powerful image, right? Because it, again, highlights this idea that given the way that we've historically thought about African-American men, black men, in fatherhood, right? You know, if there's one hat that Obama could consistently hang it, however folks felt about him politically, right? This idea of being a father and a family man. And he's gotten a lot of kudos, you know, on both sides of the aisle for that. But I want to shift a moment to really thinking about Sasha and Malia. You have two daughters who are close in age, like Sasha and Malia. I do also. What does it mean for black daughters, right, black girls at this moment in time to be able to visualize, you know, possibilities for themselves and seeing the way that Sasha and Malia, you know, circulate through the culture?
That's a great question. And I think on the night that Michelle Obama spoke, the Obama family did some significant cultural work.
Absolutely.
It was not only that we get this very warm image of the president sitting with his daughters in a far more candid way, but they're listening to this incredible black woman have the national spotlight and give perhaps the most moving speech of the convention, the most one of the most significant speeches of the convention, and then to see on a subsequent evening the two of them embrace. In a very genuine, what seemed to be a very genuine way. That was an important, I think, moment. But to go back to Sasha and Malia, I do think it is that's a very important moment. Their togetherness with their father, who has already sacrificed enormous amounts of time and energy, right? And you know, as a father of two daughters, you know as well as I do that our presence in their everyday lives is important to them.
You know, I always think about this, and I took this for granted, and it's a little notion that Nas, you know, he did a wonderful song over the summer about his daughter, and he talks about the fact that he wished he had spent more time, as she's coming into adulthood, that he had spent more time with her in the car. And you take for granted that time. You know, my oldest is old enough to be sitting next to me now, but those times where they're in the back seat, and you really could frame the world for them in certain kinds of ways. They're going to listen to what you want to listen to. You're going to talk about what you want to. And he doesn't have those opportunities, right? President Obama can't just pop into the minivan and drive his daughters to school, right? You know, so that time, you know, we take for granted that kind of time that we have with our daughters.
It's true, and it goes by so fast. I look at my daughters, I look at your daughters, I look at Sasha and Malia, and I am amazed at how fast time seems to be going. And it's only when you suddenly recognize that, you know, they have less time at home now than they had, that you start to get all of a sudden a little concerned about the quality of time that you can spend with them. But they have given. I think the Obamas have given us an enormous cultural gift that way, right? And on some level, it is profoundly visual. I mean, it takes us back to the subject of visual images, right? We receive it visually in ways that are shaping us. I mean, that's the thing about visual culture that we don't always think about. We imagine that we are producers. But once we've produced a visual image, that visual image will in turn start doing something, working on us. It has its own, on a certain level, it has its own autonomy that in turn does something back. It works on us. And I'm under no illusion that the representation of family, the representation of black girls, black women in this visually this wide visual moment is doing important cultural work. Yeah, those two young ladies have, I think, as far as anyone can tell, because we only get a public image, have done very well under the circumstances. Yeah. And you know, it seems very clear that the Obamas do the best they can, as we all do as parents, to raise conscientious and not just self-respecting, but young ladies that respect their parents and their grandparents, and who have to go to school the day after Dad gives this incredible speech, right? You know, I love that about how they are being reared, and it's a, you know, it helps. It's inspiring. It's profoundly inspiring. I also read a piece not too long after the Obama speech, Michelle Obama's speech, about some of the things that she insists upon as she rears her daughter. And you know, one of the things that they do is, both of our daughters are in sports. Obamas apparently require their daughters to be in 2 sports. One sport the parents choose, and the other sport they choose. And there's an impressive reason why parents should choose one of why their parents should choose one of their sports. I'm not sure it's going to work in my house, but you know, I like the idea of it.
You're watching Left of Black. I'm your host, Mark Anthony Neal. We're joined by Professor Maurice Wallace this afternoon, who's a professor of African American Studies and English here at Duke University, author Constructing the Black Masculine, Identity and Ideality in African American Men's Literature and Culture, 1775 to 1995, and the editor of the new book with Sean Michelle Smith, Pictures and Progress, Early Photography and the Making of African American Identity. I want to shift gears just a little bit. I guess in some ways, in some sectors, you know, we refer to as Reverend Dr. Maurice Wallace. And, you know, we're acknowledging again, memorializing 9/11, you know, now 11 years since the tragedy of September 11th, 2001. And, you know, I'm not the most dutiful churchgoer. You know, there's always a reason not to get up early, to go to church. But if I remember anything about that period of time, if I fully understood the power of the pulpit, it was those men and those women who were in the pulpit after 9/11 who had this responsibility, right, to make sense of this. When Katrina occurred, right, this kind of role of making sense with this. Talk a little bit, as you know, as you're kind of working in both of these worlds, about what it's like when these kind of incredible tragedies occur, right? And particularly, you know, to very specific communities, if we're talking about Katrina, working through, helping folks work through making sense of these tragedies and this trauma.
Well, the challenge and the profound difficulty of it all is that on a very fundamental level, it doesn't make sense. And yet you're looked upon to provide answers where there is no easily packaged explanation.
And on one side, you know, part of your training as a scholar is that you're supposed to be able to have a response. Intellectually, you're supposed to have a response to this. And that's not necessarily going to be the right strategy when you're in the pulpit.
That's right. That's right. There is perhaps an intellectual response that would satisfy an intellectual audience. Now, my congregation and all of our congregations are intellectual, but perhaps not in the professional way that my students at Duke would be, my graduate students would be, right? So what they are looking for is not professional intellectualism. They're looking for a lived intellectual, an embodied intellectualism, right? To help make sense of this on the ground. And the challenge is often to say that I recognize, I acknowledge, I think I speak with the voice of God when I articulate deep concern, sensitivity, even sympathy for what has happened. There is, I think we have difficulty trying to give voice to the absurd. But there are times when we have to try to articulate the chaos and the confusion before we can try to articulate what an answer would be. And my whole, you know, my method has always been to be slightly less concerned that I give a theological explanation for what seems inexplicable, rather to look at the consequences of this absurdity and see where we might see God, where we might insinuate ourselves as representatives of the kingdom, and what kind of good work we can do as human beings, as brothers and sisters, to bring relief to those who suffer in response to something that we can't altogether make sense of. And so I think that is vital. And to the degree that we can speak to folks in all walks of life, to the degree that we can speak to people on personal levels, as well as think of responsibilities of systems in more abstract ways, I think we're called to speak in two voices, at least two voices. And that's not, again, that's not altogether easy to do, nor to package in the limited space of time you have on a given Sunday morning, and then to think you only have one shot a week to get this and to do the very best you can.
Right. And that's if they're engaged on that Sunday morning.
That's right.
And not thinking about paying their bills.
That's
and
right.
The football game that's going to start at 1 o'clock.
That's right. That's right. Because all of those things are happening simultaneously, and sometimes it's work for the one who's supposed to give voice to these issues to think less about his bills and what game he wants to watch, and to really speak to the needs as you perceive them are present before you. It's an awesome responsibility, but it's also fulfilling in some really inexplicable ways. I think that both teaching and preaching chose me more than I chose them, and probably best because, you know, if I thought or imagined that I had chosen these vocations, I would probably have chosen to leave them by now as well. But it's it's a daunting responsibility, and I pray daily that other men and women who are called to this task take it as seriously as the time's call. And it's a desperate era. It's a desperate moment, and all of these absurdities, they're not new, obviously. Absurdity happens historically, we know that, but the urgency to give voice to these things, I think, is all the more compelling because of what we have to compete against, right? We're competing against commodification. We're competing against imperialism. We're competing against American exceptionalism. We're competing against a lot that is not altogether healthy for the spiritual lives of the people who we serve. And we have to do our best to ascertain what's healthy, what's unhealthy, and to give voice to it, and then to trust the intelligence of the people who we serve to be in conversation and in dialogue with us about the profound life lessons, the profound theological matters that sometimes don't happen to us as theology per se, but happen to us as life. Yeah. And that's a very significant responsibility, but it has its rewards as well. I have to be honest about that, and I'm glad to occupy that space.
You're watching Left of Black. We're here with Professor Maurice Wallace, Duke University. I want to talk a little bit about professorial style. Tanisha Ford, a young scholar up at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, just did a piece for the Feminist Wire on professorial style, and she interviewed a few of our female colleagues, Treva Lindsay, Tiffany Gill, Ebony Otley, a few other folks. And, you know, we can think about the example of, say, someone like Darlene Clark Hine, you know, who's been very vocal about how important it was for her to be embodied a certain kind of way, particularly early in her career, to be taken seriously by the students in the class and colleagues and what have you. And, you know, when you came into the studio, our producer, Catherine, you know, made the point of mentioning your seersucker suit. and I think in the 8 years that I've known you, I've never seen you wear the same outfit more than once. So this is clearly something that's important to you. You know, if my wife and I joke every once in a while about doing a kind of black professor calendar, right? Yeah. I was like, I got to get Maurice, I got to get DeVarian Baldwin. Give us a little bit of the Professor Maurice Wallace style brief. You know, what are you thinking about when you're thinking about going into the classroom or giving a lecture someplace or just in a meeting,
Yeah,
you know, about how that needs to look, you know, on a style level.
Yeah. Well, some of it is aesthetic taste, and some of it is professorial strategy.
I mean, I think I've said to other colleagues that Maurice is a dandy. You know, when all is said and done, right? He's a professorial dandy.
I'm evolving though, because I identify with those early anxieties expressed by Darlene, right?
Yeah.
And I was, you know, suddenly put into a position at Yale I never thought I would get, and without any Ivy League pedigree.
And you got to wear the part.
And I got to wear the part. And it's as much for my colleagues as it is for for my students. And so I was very intentional, I think, in those days to put on a kind of professorial respectability, to wear a kind of professorial respectability. And on some levels, I have to admit, too, my own anxieties about whether I was in the right place played into those, into some of those choices. But then I had a family, and I'm getting older, and so I'm a little bit more relaxed about things.
Clothes are expensive.
Clothes are expensive. You know, you'd be surprised where I got this seersucker suit, to tell you the truth. It wasn't a mall. In any case, yeah, these things I'm starting to evolve from. So I can't remember the last time I wore a tie.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, I don't even wear ties to church. And at once upon a time, I was committed to ties. I was committed, you know, even to the bow tie.
Right. We have colleagues that still walk around campus wearing bow ties.
But a lot of it has to do with experience, I think. It has to do today more with feeling comfortable in a number of different ways, a number of different registers. I'm comfortable in the South. I'm comfortable on this campus. I'm comfortable in my department. I'm comfortable with my colleagues. I'm comfortable with myself. I'm comfortable with what I know. I'm comfortable with what I don't know. And all of these things get somehow reflected in my decisions on any given day to pull a certain thing from the closet. And I'm good at, you know, mixing and matching things, and the thing you thought you didn't see yesterday, you actually did see it with a different, something different. I'm far more limited than you're giving me credit for. But you know, I've also been thinking about sartorial politics, actually, since I started the project with the Civil War soldiers, right, and what the meaning of uniforms was for a Civil War soldier. And you'd be surprised how much text there is devoted to those soldiers themselves commenting on, either loving or hating what they're wearing, right? Complaining about it or feeling fully empowered by wearing it. And so, you know, the history of dress is a very important history that has been probably too much neglected. We could learn some more about Black sartorial politics. I'm also thinking of Monica Miller's book on the Black dandies, which is a powerful testament to what we can do when we think about the history of sartorial politics. It's only one part of what that book is about, but it's an important and very effective part of that book. So style, I suppose, matters. I should feel flattered that some folks think I have a little bit of it, so you know, I can't complain about that. But I am, yeah, it's evolving, and it has as much to do with the environment I occupy as it does with my sense of who I am in the world.
We've been joined this afternoon by Professor Maurice Wallace, who is a professor of English and African American Studies here at Duke University. He's the author of Constructing the Black Masculine, Identity and Ideality in African American Men's Literature and Culture, 1775 to 1995, and the editor with Sean Michelle Smith of the recently published Pictures in Progress, Early Photography and the Making of African American Identity. Both of those are published by Duke University Press. Thanks for joining us here in studio, Maurice.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.
A lot.
Yeah. Eric, you're a real life G for this one. Yeah. All black everything. All black, you know. All black in the name of all my black heroes. All black everything. All black polos. All black medallions, yeah. All black, you know, say. All black everything. All black, you know. All black in the name of all my black